Please welcome Father Gregory Boyle.
Thank you, Patrick. It's an honor to be with all of you this morning. President Sullivan called me some time ago and said, "Greg, do you believe in free speech?" And I said, "Of course." And she said, "Good, you're giving one on May 25. I wish I could stand before you and say, I have canceled all your student debt. Oh well. I appreciate your attention. Folks on the margins are only hoping for some notice and some attention. I had a gang member stand in front of my desk, very intense and insistent, and he said, "I need your divided attention." And I said, "Well, you're in luck, because that's exactly what you'll be getting." What Martin Luther King says about church could well be said of your time here at St. Thomas. It's not the place you've come to, it's the place you go from. And you go from here to create a community of kinship such that God, in fact, might recognize it. You go from here to imagine a circle of compassion and then imagine nobody standing outside that circle. You go from St. Thomas to dismantle the barriers that exclude. And that lands you at the margins, because that's the only way they'll ever get erased, if you go out at them. And you stand with the poor and the powerless and the voiceless. You stand with the widow, orphan, and stranger, because God tells us that we have a special care for them, because these are the folks who know what it's like to have been cut off. And because they have suffered in exactly this way, they happen to be our trustworthy guides to lead the rest of us to the kinship of God. And so you're privileged to go from St. Thomas to stand with the easily despised and readily left out. You get to stand with the demonized so that the demonizing will stop. And you get to stand with the disposable so that the day will come when we stop throwing people away. You go to the margins from St. Thomas and you brace yourselves, because people will accuse you of wasting your time. But the prophet Jeremiah writes, "In this place of which you say it is a waste, there will be heard again the voice of mirth and the voice of gladness, the voices of those who sing." You do not go to the margins to make a difference. You go to the margins so that the widow, orphan, and stranger make you different. So for 35 years, I've worked with gang members in Los Angeles, and apparently President Sullivan thought that made me eminently suited to address the class of 2019. Take that up with her. Our first social enterprise was the Homeboy Bakery, where rival enemy gang members worked side by side together, wearing hairnets and baking bread. It was quite famous in the early days because it represented an exit ramp off this crazy, violent gang freeway. Our foreman was a guy named Roman, and he was a Latino gang member, the biggest drug dealer I ever knew, and I knew them all. And he not only worked with his enemies, he supervised them, which is a great deal more difficult. Part of his job was to welcome the news crews and the visitors and the tour groups and Prince Charles and his business advisors and busloads of Japanese tourists take me to your bakery. And he would kind of give them the tour. He hated that. So he and I one day were waiting in the parking lot, and a busload of agricultural magnates from the central part of California were coming on a bus, and he was having a bad attitude day. And the bus arrives, and I wave at them, I tell them where to park, and there's a microphone at the front of the bus, and Roman pretends he's the tour guide on the bus. Welcome to Homeboy Bakery. Observe gang members in their natural habitat. Please keep your hands in the bus at all times. Do not attempt to feed the homies. They are not yet tame. You know, I'm saying, cállate, cabrón. For those of you who took Spanish. And so he gives them the tour. I leave, I go to our office a couple blocks away. Well, when I come back later, I see him and I said, hey, how'd that tour go? And he goes, damn, G, what's up with white people anyway? I said, I don't know. What is up with us? He says, well, they always be using the word great. I said, really? I didn't know this. He goes, yeah, check this out. This busload of gabachos, white people, come to the bakery and they see the ovens and everything is clean and shiny. This place is great. And they see the homies, enemies, rivals working side by side. You fellas are great. And they try the bread, they go, wow, this bread, it's great. How come white people always be using the word great? I said, I have no idea. This is the first I've ever heard of that. And trust me, from that moment forward, every opportunity I could find, I told him how great he was just to mess with him. Well, cut to several months later, I get there at 11 o'clock at night, the bakery's about to close. Roman rushes me at my car and he says, you're not gonna believe what happened yesterday. And he tells me that he picks up his 4-year-old daughter, Clarissa. He's a single father. He's a man who suffered greatly in his own childhood, terrified and terrorized and tortured, abused, exposed to violence. If his story had been a flame, you'd have to keep your distance, otherwise you'd get scorched. I would not have survived a single day of his childhood, and I stand in awe at what he had to carry rather than in judgment at how he carried it. But he picks up his 4-year-old daughter, Clarissa, and he brings her to their humble little apartment where for the first time in his life, he's paying rent with honestly earned, clean, decent money. And he unlocks the front door and little Clarissa goes running down the hall and she plants herself in the living room. She extends her arms and she takes the room in with her gaze and she says, "This is great." And he said, I thought she was turning white on me. And he gets down at eye level and he says, "Mija, what's great?" And little Clarissa clutches her chest with great emotion and she says, "My home." And when he says this, the two of us, we stop and we're stunned and our eyes fill with tears and we watch each other in silence for an eternity as the tears roll down our cheeks. And finally I break the silence and I said, "You did this. You've never had a home in your life and now you have one. You did this. You used to be the biggest drug dealer in town and you stopped and you baked bread instead. You did this. You've never had a father in your life and now you are one. And I hate to have to tell you, but you're great." And I hate to have to tell you that the first time I ever told that story was at his funeral some months later. He was killed in the afternoon as he was packing his car to go on a camping trip. Two guys came by, saw him, and must have thought, he'll do, and killed him. But I told that story because all his homies kept saying, what's the point of doing good if that can happen to you? And I told that packed church that night, here's the point, that before Roman left us, he discovered the truth of who he was, that he was exactly what God had in mind when God made him, and he became that truth. He inhabited that truth, and no bullet can pierce it. No 4 prison walls can keep it out, and death can't touch it because it's great. And my heart has been altered forever because of him. You do not go to the margins to make a difference, but so that you can be made different. And so St. Thomas is not the place you've come to. It was always going to be the place you go from, and you go from here to imagine a circle of compassion, and then imagine nobody is standing outside of it. And my sense of you graduates already is that long ago you ceased to care whether anyone accuses you of wasting your time at the margins. For in this place of which you say it is a waste, there will be heard again the voice of mirth and the voice of gladness, the voices of those who sing. Tommy's forever. God bless you, class of 2019.